In my search to properly explain what makes manga and anime so great, I've decided to put one of the art form's most famous genres under the microscope and see what makes these masterpieces tick. This is the Art of Shonen. Terminology and etymology. Before we jump into shonen, let's quickly glance over some key points within the history of manga. If you're already familiar with manga's origins, feel free to skip to the next section. The word manga is comprised of two written characters or kanji, the kanji for informal or whimsical, man, and the one for drawing, ga. The word manga has been around all the way back since the 1800s. However, it was only until around 1920 that it became a common word. An artist by the name of Rakuten Kitazawa, a forefather of manga, is often accredited with popularizing the term in its modern usage. It is said that after studying Western-style cartoons for a number of years, he founded his own magazine, which sold throughout Asia and greatly influenced many other artists. Now, the Japanese word shonen essentially translates to few years. Shonen historically referred to juveniles in a general sense, and was used by the Japanese publishing industry to designate publications aimed at children and young people until the end of the 19th century. The word eventually changed to mean what we know as media aimed at adolescent boys, which begun with the practice of segmenting magazines by gender and age-specific target groups. This system of segmentation developed all throughout the 1900s and is now generally used as a classification system by manga publishers. This system extends into works adapted from manga like anime, for instance. History: pre-war and wartime era. Historically, most early youth magazines were to all outward appearances unisex, Shonen Sekai being the first youth magazine in Japan in 1895, targeting a readership of both boys and girls. However, the editorial content of these publications clearly concerned topics that were of greater interest to boys at the time. This gave rise to the first exclusively shoujo or girls magazines in 1902. Thus, shonen magazines began to exclusively target young male readers. Back then, these magazines didn't even publish manga. It was only until 1907 that Shonen Paku became the first shonen magazine to do so. This was of course followed by Shonen Club in 1914 and later Yonen Club. Some of the more prominent manga series of these early shonen magazines were Norakuru by Suiho Tagawa and Tank Tankuro by Gajo Sakamoto. Shonen magazine enjoyed significant popularity during the 1920s and 1930s, with Yonen Club selling over 950,000 copies. However, during the Second Sino-Japanese War and Second World War, magazine sales declined, and publications were used increasingly for wartime propaganda purposes. The manga content in these publications were reduced, and the series that remain typically focused on patriotic or militaristic themes. Stories about samurai, robots, were fighting in the war against Allied forces. Pretty much the same thing we see in Western superhero comics, in which the superheroes were depicted as fighting the Axis powers during the same period. Post-war era. During the post-war occupation of Japan, the Japanese publishing industry was rebuilt. Under initially strict guidelines, stories focused on war, combat, and most competitive sports were banned with the aim of discouraging belligerents and hindering the use of manga for pro-imperial propaganda. During this period, Osamu Tezuka led the medium to new heights with series such as Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion. Tezuka was inspired by American cartoons and founded the so-called story manga, which is what we know commonly today as long-running manga series with a cinematic style and continuity across multiple chapters, a big difference from the one-off comic strips that had been prominent back then. Fast forward to the modern era. During the modern era, the artistic and thematic differences between shonen and shoujo began to narrow considerably. By the 1980s, there was an ubiquitous exchange of stylistic devices between the two. This is when the characteristically large eyes of shoujo manga are introduced into shonen manga to convey the emotions of characters. We see more female characters gaining prominence as both supporting and leading characters in shonen manga. Other graphic storytelling techniques that originated in shoujo manga were also brought into shonen manga and have since become common. Female manga artists also began to rise in popularity and gain commercial success as creatives in their own right. Characteristics of manga, themes, and genres. The themes and values of shonen manga are easily deduced by the magazine's individual slogan. If you take a look at Shonen Jump's mantra, for example, which is friendship, perseverance, and victory, or Koro Koro comics, courage, friendship, and fighting spirit, you'll notice the differences instantaneously. While The editorial focus of shonen manga for a long time has been primarily on action, adventure, and the fighting of monsters or other forces of evil. However, what makes shonen so special in my opinion is its editorial diversity and how expertly the use of subgenres are employed. This is something not common within many comic book cultures. Shonen manga can include and is not limited to comedy, crime, romance, slice of life. Heck, look at Food Wars, an entire shonen manga about Japanese cooking mixed with comedy, ecchi, and slice of life elements. And then you may take a look at the brutal battles within the panels of Baki and assume it's not shonen. Well, it is. Within shonen, everyone's almost guaranteed to find something perfectly suited for their individual taste.
Nice.
Narrative conventions. Happy endings can frequently be found in shonen manga, but are not mandatory. Authors sometimes go out of their way to provide happy endings in shonen manga just to please the demographic. Lately, we've seen an increase in what I like to call dark shonen series, in which everything doesn't always end a-okay. Characters, plot, and the themes of these manga are often rather macabre and heavily laden with euphemism and metaphor. An essential narrative device in shonen manga is rivalry, especially between the hero and his opponent. Fights and quests often become the central element. Some of the more famous rivalries that utilize this type of archetypal story include Naruto and Sasuke, Guy and Kakashi from Naruto, Goku and Vegeta, or Beerus and Champa from Dragon Ball. The list goes on. Almost every shonen illustrates rivalry in some way. Shonen protagonists tend to be outcasts or underdogs in some way. However, through training, determination, and the will to get stronger, they will eventually overcome obstacles and succeed. I've always considered shonen to be more or less coming-of-age stories, all set to the drum of the hero's journey. Visual style. The visual style is one that is constantly changing. If we look back to the 90s, 80s, and even earlier, it becomes strikingly clear. I've had my own personal gripes over the gradual changes in art style, yet it's undeniable that manga iconography is now one of the most widespread artistic styles in modern-day pop culture. A common visual device in shonen action series is to depict the contours of figures with rough, coarse motion lines to give the appearance of movement. Lately, we've seen countless studios take to using CGI in anime, and even some illustrators have been using CGI figures alongside their drawings. While this is a hotly debated topic amongst the anime and manga community, it's not what our focus is on today. I'm not necessarily a fan of the CGI in anime, and in my opinion, I find it to be rather lifeless and slow, if that makes any sense. Berserk and the new Trigun being some examples, yet I've also seen studios brilliantly employ CGI art throughout their projects. MAPPA does this with Attack on Titan, parts of Chainsaw Man, and lately even Nier Automata version 1. I'm still not a fan of watching anime that looks like a Final Fantasy cutscene though, but that's just me. When all of these individual puzzle pieces are put together in the right way, we get something spectacular, and what is in my opinion, some of the best stories in modern history. Yet, I often ask myself, what makes them so great to begin with? How do all these little stories that I've grown to love become so moving and have me so emotionally involved in them? Well, here are some of the reasons why I think the genre is amazing. I think the versatility found within the shonen genre is like no other. The vast array of different stories it has to offer is simply mind-boggling. The characters in shonen are loved by fans worldwide, primarily because they feel relatable and authentic to the viewers. Within shonen, you'll find characters facing the grimmest life or death situations, and they'll still feel relatable in some way to the average viewer because of their personality or resolve. The characters' quirks remind us of ourselves. The messages of optimism in shonen manga and anime are extremely important as well. Western comics and seinen have a tendency to lean towards apocalyptic or more grim views of humanity and where we're all heading. While these sorts of stories are meaningful in their own right, the blatant optimism often found within shonen is a nice change of pace/escape. The unique societal commentaries that shonen provides offer a rare perspective on life and the things we all deal with, especially concerning teens and young adults. I ask myself, what other forms of media display the power of friendship so commonly? Of course, you're going to get movies and films and books that definitely do this to some extent. However, in shonen, it's more of a central theme. Unlike the comics of Marvel and DC, which all center around adult men and women saving the rest of the world, Naruto and Hunter x Hunter, they show that you can be the hero no matter your age, and that camaraderie between friends is what makes these adventures worth it. Ultimately, a hero can only be as good as his villain, and the antagonists within shonen are some of the most complex, intriguing, and well-balanced villains across any genre. I've seen villains with understandable motivations and goals, paralleling the main cast perfectly. Look at Pain from Naruto. The villain designed so well, he forces the protagonist to empathize with him. He's motivated by raw hurt and drive for revenge, a true product of his environment. A war orphan from a conflict in which the Hidden Leaf was centrally involved. The supposed good guys birthed one of the greatest villains their world had ever known. Naruto generally forgives everyone, even some really messed up folk. However, fighting Pain forces him to understand revenge. This is a vital lesson for him as he struggles to understand his friend and rival Sasuke. Meruem from Hunter x Hunter is quite possibly one of the greatest villains throughout all anime. He starts out so savage that he literally, and I quote, slays and eats his own kind, chimera ants, if they fail to show him total deference. He sees himself as nearly flawless, and his incredible strength backs up his viewpoint. Then he meets Kamigi and starts not only surprising himself, but the audience as well, with moments of humanity, of even kindness, which all serve to strengthen his character. Meruem gives us one of the strongest arcs of the entire series, and he never even meets the protagonist, Gon. His character progression was like no other, and there are numerous examples of brilliantly written villains all throughout manga, and especially shonen. On another note, it's undeniable that shonen showcases some of the best fights in manga and anime. Whether it's Gohan vs. Cell or Tanjiro and Rengoku and Mugen Train, illustrators and animators are continuously taking the art form to new heights. The pure excitement I felt when watching Levi or Netero vs. Meruem's battle is something I won't forget. Jujutsu Kaisen, My Hero Academia, OG Dragon Ball Z, each has left a lasting mark on manga in their own way, and the battles they gave us will go down in history. Bottom line, shonen is about adventure, growth, and exploration. Whether it's utilizing humor to do so, or making a parody of overused tropes, each and every author has the potential to write something extraordinary. And for all of my fellow creators out there that have been working on their own manga at various stages, I couldn't encourage you more. Keep doing what you're doing, elevate and stay blessed. Later, ninjas.